Hey everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. I just felt led to gather for a special time of prayer, not just because of 9/11 and remembering those lives lost, but also to lift up our country together. So here's the plan. I'll read a scripture to set the tone. Our pastors will take turns leading prayer on different topics, and you can pray along, either quietly by yourself or in small groups. Just come as you are and let's seek God's guidance together. Alright, so let's dive into this first topic, praying for the judges in our land. Now, I know it might sound kind of formal at first, but stick with me here, because it's really about the heart of leadership and integrity, and how that affects all of us. Pastor Tyler opened this segment by pointing us back to some really powerful scripture, Isaiah 126, and also Proverbs 11:20, which talks about how God detests crooked hearts but delights in those with integrity. And here's the thing, judges, our leaders in the courts, they set the tone for so much of society, right? Their decisions ripple out in ways that touch every part of life, from families to communities to entire states. So praying for integrity isn't just abstract, it's practical, it's really tangible. Tyler started by acknowledging, honestly, that our country has drifted away from some of those values over the decades. He didn't sugarcoat it. He was upfront about how our society can sometimes lean toward choices that aren't aligned with righteousness. And that's okay to admit when you're coming to God in prayer. In fact, it's necessary. So he encouraged us to really bring that honesty into our prayer time, to not just go through the motions, but to actually reflect on where we've fallen short, individually and collectively, and ask for guidance and restoration. One of the key points he made, something that really stuck with me, is about restoring righteousness. Like, imagine a judge who makes decisions that are fair, just, and aligned with moral integrity. That's what he was talking about, restoring that sense of rightness to the very system that impacts so many lives. Tyler emphasized that we want judges who don't just talk about virtue or fairness, but who live it, who lead by example. And it's not about them being perfect, obviously, but about them striving to act righteously and making decisions that honor truth and justice. And here's the reflection piece. When we pray for those judges, we're not just thinking about them in isolation, we're thinking about how their leadership will affect communities, schools, families, even the culture at large. He also touched on avoiding the crooked paths. And I think we all get what that means, right? It's a metaphor, but it's real. It's about those decisions and choices that can mislead or harm, that stray from integrity. And Tyler didn't shy away from pointing out that these crooked paths exist. He said those walking in evil are literally on a crooked path, which is a sobering thought, but it's also hopeful because we can pray for the opposite, for uprightness, for integrity, for leaders who set a tone that others can follow. There's a ripple effect, and that's the part that really makes this personal. It's like what we lift up in prayer doesn't just stay in the church or in a meeting, it can influence the very fabric of society. Then, he made it really practical. Tyler encouraged everyone to participate in prayer, not in a performance kind of way, but genuinely. You could pray quietly by yourself, or with a couple of friends in a small group, and whatever feels comfortable. He even painted this picture of a holy rumble, not loud in a showy way, but like a symphony of prayer, where multiple people are lifting up their hearts, and it's all coming together. It's such a visual, right? And it gives a sense of unity and collective intention without forcing anyone into a format they're not comfortable with. Just the freedom to pray sincerely where you are. Tyler led us through the actual prayer points, asking God to forgive our sins as a nation, to heal the land, and to place judges who act with integrity, courage, and righteousness. And I loved how he acknowledged that. Honestly, we don't always deserve this guidance, but we can plead and cry out for it anyway. There's humility in that, which feels really important when you're speaking to God. He talked about judges who are even Christians, who would not be ashamed to uphold truth and righteousness in their decisions, and how those decisions can set a standard for others. It's not just about laws, it's about the example they set, the character they model. And then he wrapped it back around for the viewers, reminding us again that we can pray individually or in small groups for a couple of minutes, lifting up these judges and asking God to bring the right leaders to every state. Leaders who will lead with integrity, make wise choices, and set a positive tone for our nation. Tyler really made it conversational and reflective, mixing scriptural reminders, practical guidance, and encouragement to just be genuine in prayer. He didn't rush it, he let it breathe. And that's kind of the heart of what this moment is about. honest reflection, sincere prayer, and lifting up those in authority who shape our society in meaningful ways. Okay, so moving on to the next topic, was Pastor Kelly led us into praying specifically for border security and the safety of our nation. Now, this is one of those areas where you can really feel the weight of responsibility, right? He reminded us that God has made every nation with boundaries and that those borders matter, not just politically, but spiritually and practically too. And here's the thing, he made it clear that our prayers aren't just about walls or fences, it's about protection, guidance, and wisdom for the leaders making these decisions. Kelly encouraged us to lift up our leaders first. I mean, whether we agree with them or not, they're in positions that affect the safety of millions of people, so it's important to pray for their hearts and their discernment. And he brought up this point about lawful immigrants, which I thought was really interesting. He asked us to pray that those coming through the proper channels would find favor, that they would persevere, and that the process wouldn't be unnecessarily burdensome. It's kind of a reminder that prayer isn't just for ourselves or for the obvious concerns, it's for the people who are trying to do things the right way too. Then he turned the focus to protection for citizens from those who might have evil intent. And honestly, that felt really personal, like it was about each of us. He wasn't talking abstractly, he was talking about real safety, and he encouraged us to imagine the hands of God guarding our communities, surrounding us with his protection. And the same goes for the border agents themselves. These are people putting themselves in risky positions every day, and we prayed for their safety, their wisdom, and for God to guide them in their duties. It's a heavy topic, but he presented it in such a way that you could see the people behind the policies, which makes it really relatable. And here's the cool part. Kelly also encouraged us to participate in our own way. You didn't have to be on the stage or in a big group. You could just be wherever you are, quietly lifting up prayers, asking God to cover our nation. He painted this picture of a holy rumble again, like a symphony of prayer where everyone's voices, quiet, loud, internal, or shared in a small circle, blend together. And it's not performative at all, it's sincere. He wanted us to really feel that our prayers, individually and collectively, have an impact, like we're standing together as a people asking for protection, safety, and guidance. Kelly also reminded us to keep perspective and gratitude in the mix. We prayed for safe borders, yes, but also for the people entering the country in the right way, for leaders to recognize the importance of safety, and for divine guidance in decisions that are complicated and sometimes politically charged. It's about balancing justice, mercy, and discernment, asking God to guide those making tough calls and to surround everyone involved with his protection. By the end, it felt really empowering, because prayer is such a personal and participatory thing. You're not just watching or listening, you're joining in, bringing your own heart and intentions, and that collective energy feels, well, powerful. It's about trusting God to guard our nation, guide our leaders, and keep our communities safe. And even while praying quietly, there's this sense of connection with everyone else participating, like a web of concern and hope stretching across the country, all lifted to God together. Okay? So let's talk about praying for Israel. Pastor Kelly really emphasized how important this is, and honestly, it hit me in a new way. He reminded us that Israel is called the apple of God's eye, which is just such a powerful image, right? It's like God's special care is on them, and we get to join in that care through prayer. So we lifted up the nation itself, praying for protection over the land, for safety across its borders, and for security from threats coming from every direction. North, east, south, west, you name it. It's not just political, it's deeply personal, because people live there every day and face real challenges. Then he brought our focus to the leaders, both in Israel and globally. Pastor Kelly asked us to pray that Israel's leaders, including the Prime Minister, would have wisdom from God in their decisions. And it wasn't just about smart policies, it was about hearts aligned with justice, truth, and God's guidance. And he made a point that, honestly, global leadership matters too. Decisions made in other countries, in international bodies, even the UN can affect Israel. So we lifted up prayers that world leaders would act favorably, supporting Israel in ways that promote peace, protection, and justice. And you know, it really made me think, prayer doesn't just stay local, it can ripple out and influence things we can't even see. But Pastor Kelly didn't stop there. He reminded us to pray for the Jewish people themselves, their hearts, their safety, their daily lives. It's easy to get caught up in policies and politics, but at the core, these are real people with families, dreams, and challenges. He encouraged us to ask God to open their hearts, to bless them, and to give them protection and guidance. And here's the thing, it's so much more powerful when you picture actual people in your mind, praying for them personally, even from far away. It just makes the prayer feel alive and real. He also wove in this beautiful, simple idea that we could pray however we felt comfortable, alone, quietly, or in a small group. It doesn't have to be loud or performative. He used this phrase, a kind of holy rumble, imagining all these prayers from all these people joining together. And honestly, you can feel the hope in that. It's like an invisible network of care stretching across the room, the city, the country, and even across nations. And then there's the part about threats, both physical and political. Pastor Kelly reminded us that these are real, serious concerns, and that our prayers for protection, wisdom, and guidance matter. But he kept it reflective and simple, inviting us to make it personal. And again, he brought it back to the big picture, global leaders, international policies, and the need for favor and wisdom at every level. By the end, it felt really moving because this wasn't just a lecture or a checklist. It was a heartfelt invitation to join in, to pray with intention, and to feel connected with everyone else lifting up Israel. Even quietly, even alone, your prayer adds to this collective wave of hope and support. And well, it's kind of inspiring, honestly, to think about how God can move through all those prayers together. You just want to take a moment, reflect, and really commit your heart to pray for the nation, its people, and its leaders, right? Alright, so now let's dive into praying for religious liberty. Pastor Kelly really took time here to help us reflect, not just on asking for protection, but also on gratitude for the freedoms we enjoy. And I have to say, it kind of makes you pause, right? We often take for granted the ability to gather, to read our scriptures openly, to worship freely, and to share our faith without fear. Kelly reminded us that these freedoms are precious and that it's important to thank God for them, not just ask for more. And he made it really conversational, like, hey, let's just sit and acknowledge this, really feel the gratitude in our hearts. It was a good reminder that prayer is as much about thanksgiving as it is about intercession. Then he shifted to praying for our leaders, asking God to guide them to protect and uphold those religious liberties. And I loved how he framed it, not in a political or formal sense, but really from the perspective of wisdom, courage, and discernment. Like, leaders need to make choices that protect the rights of people to worship and practice faith openly, and we're asking God to guide their hearts and minds. It's this mix of responsibility and accountability that makes the prayer feel alive. We're not just hoping things work out, we're actively lifting up leaders and asking for divine guidance in how they lead. Pastor Kelly also encouraged us to think beyond just protection. He reminded us that we can be people of strength and courage ourselves, that even when challenges come, even when freedoms are questioned or threatened, we can respond with integrity and discernment. It's about living a life that honors those freedoms and using them wisely. And I love how he wove in reflection too, asking us to consider what it means personally to stand for what's right, to live in a way that honors God and the liberties we've been given. That part felt really intimate, like a gentle nudge to not just pray, but to embody the values we're praying for. He also highlighted the balance between prayer and thanksgiving. Like, it's not just about asking for continued freedoms, it's also about recognizing and appreciating the ones we already have. That dual focus made the prayer feel rich and layered, and you could sense this tone of humility and gratitude in his words. He didn't rush, he let it breathe. There were little pauses where you could really feel yourself reflecting on your own blessings and the role of faith in maintaining those freedoms. And then he tied it all together, circling back to commitment, committing our land, our communities, and our hearts to God's guidance. He reminded us to seek wisdom for the future, for interpreting laws justly, and for living courageously, not just for ourselves, but for the greater good. And that's where it really hits. You realize it's personal and collective at the same time. Every prayer, every act of gratitude, every reflection on freedom builds this quiet strength and sense of purpose. By the end, it felt like this warm, reflective space where you could pause, breathe, and genuinely lift up the liberties we have. ask for guidance for leaders, and commit to living faithfully. It wasn't a lecture, it wasn't formal, it was honest, heartfelt, and inclusive, inviting everyone to take part in a moment of awareness, thanks, and prayer. And yeah, it just leaves you feeling both humbled and encouraged to participate, right? Okay. So the next part we want to talk about is praying for God's design of biological sex. And honestly, this is one of those topics where you really feel the weight of both compassion and responsibility. Pastor Gary led us into this with a focus on understanding and protecting the way God created boys and girls, men and women. He reminded us that each person is fearfully and wonderfully made, with unique gifts, personalities, and purposes, and that these distinctions matter, not just spiritually, but socially and culturally as well. And, he didn't approach it in a judgmental way. He emphasized empathy, understanding, and lifting people up in prayer. He asked us to pray for individuals who are struggling with gender confusion, whether because of personal circumstances, societal pressures, or spiritual influences. And I really appreciated how he framed it, like acknowledging that there are real struggles and that people's hearts and minds can be confused, but that God's clarity and guidance can bring peace and understanding. So it's not just about asserting rules, it's about asking God to bring clarity to hearts, minds, and spirits to help individuals find a sense of identity and purpose that aligns with his design. And then he tied it to the bigger picture, which is really important. He encouraged prayers for legislative clarity and protection, like laws and policies that honor and uphold the natural distinctions between men and women. But even here, it wasn't heavy-handed or political in a scary way. He kept it reflective and personal, asking us to consider the importance of protecting children, young people, and public spaces in a thoughtful yet compassionate way. There's this idea that prayer is both intimate and societal. You're thinking about individuals, but also about the structures and systems that shape their lives. Pastor Gary also highlighted the role of schools, families, and communities in this, and he invited us to lift up prayer for guidance and discernment for leaders and lawmakers. It's like we're not just praying for abstract concepts, we're praying for real people making decisions that impact kids, families, and society at large. And he encouraged us to approach it with understanding and compassion, not condemnation. Wait, there's a lot of care in his words, and you can sense that the goal is restoration, clarity, and protection, not judgment. Throughout this portion, he kept the tone gentle and conversational, with natural pauses and moments to reflect, which really helps when you're praying along. He reminded us that prayer is participatory. You can do it quietly by yourself or in small groups, and that every heartfelt prayer matters. It's not about volume or showiness. It's about sincerity and compassion. By the end, the takeaway was really clear. We're lifting up both individuals and society, asking for God's protection, guidance, and clarity in his design. We're acknowledging struggles, praying for understanding, and seeking wisdom for those in positions to make decisions that impact others. And throughout it all, the tone is hopeful and empathetic, encouraging viewers to participate in prayer thoughtfully, compassionately, and sincerely. It's a moment of reflection, intercession, and care, inviting everyone to join in from wherever they are, with hearts open and sincere, really leaning into understanding, compassion, and hope. Alright, so moving on, Pastor Mike took us into this really heartfelt segment on praying for families, and I have to say, it felt so personal. He opened by reminding us that children are a heritage from the Lord, a true blessing, and that every family is a gift in itself. And he didn't just speak in general terms. He talked about the real struggles that families face every day, the pressures from society, from work, from culture, and just life in general. It was a reminder that family unity isn't automatic. It takes care, attention, and yes, prayer. And the way he framed it, it wasn't about finger pointing or guilt. It was really about coming humbly before God and asking for guidance, support, and protection for each family. He emphasized the importance of unity within the family. I mean, think about it. Our homes are the first places where children learn values, love, respect, and trust. Pastor Mike talked about praying for married couples who are struggling, for parents to have wisdom and humility, for communication to improve, and for reconciliation where needed. And he said something that really stuck with me, that prayer can actually transform relationships. It's not magic, obviously, but when we pray with intention, asking for God's guidance and grace, it can open doors to healing that we couldn't open on our own, and He encouraged us to lift up those prayers honestly, even naming struggles if that felt right. Because God already knows them, and there's power in bringing them before Him. Then He shifted to the children, and it was so tender. He asked us to pray for their protection, both physically and spiritually, that they would grow up with guidance and clarity, that they would honor and respect their parents, and that they'd be equipped to make good choices. And honestly, He really encouraged us to think practically, like how influences from school, media, and culture can impact children, and how prayer can be a tool to cover them, guide them, and shape their hearts. It's this mix of care, reflection, and intentionality that made it feel so real and relatable. Pastor Mike also touched on parental rights and the challenges facing families in today's culture. He talked about things like laws and policies that might affect children and parents, and he encouraged us to pray for wisdom and discernment for families navigating those challenges. And again, it wasn't about fear-mongering or anger. It was about thoughtful, sincere prayer that seeks God's guidance, protection, and provision. There's this sense of partnership, like we're not just asking God to do things for us, but we're actively participating in the process by lifting these issues up in prayer and considering practical ways to act in our own communities. He also reminded us to pray for the larger community, for the churches, schools, and neighborhoods that support families. That the collective effort of people who care, combined with prayer, can help create environments where families thrive. And throughout it, his tone was so conversational. He used small pauses, light filler words, and reflections that made it feel like he was speaking directly to us in the room, not just giving a speech. There was warmth, empathy, and a sense of shared responsibility. By the end, the focus was really clear. Pray for unity, for protection of children, for parental wisdom, for marriages to be strengthened, and for families to navigate cultural pressures with grace and discernment. And the invitation to viewers was simple but profound. Participate sincerely, reflect on your own family, and consider the wider impact on your community. It's not just about praying in isolation, it's about being part of a network of support and intentionality that can help families thrive. It's reflective, compassionate, and real, and it encourages everyone to engage deeply, thoughtfully, and empathetically in prayer for this essential foundation of society. Okay, so now let's move into this deeply moving part, praying for life, the unborn, and valuing human life at every stage. Pastor Gary led us into this with such a heartfelt, urgent tone, and honestly, it really makes you stop and think, right? He reminded us that God is the author of life, and that every person, from the moment of conception, is known, loved, and set apart. And I mean, that perspective really sets the stage for prayer, because it's not abstract, it's about real people, real lives, and real hearts. He started by pointing out the current state of our nation, acknowledging that abortion has become so normalized and easily accessible. And, well, that's a tough reality to face, but he approached it not with condemnation, but with prayerful urgency and compassion. He encouraged us to intercede on behalf of leaders, asking God to move in their hearts and minds, to open their eyes to the value of life, and to guide their decisions in ways that honor the sanctity of life. It's a combination of reflection, advocacy, and heartfelt intercession that makes this section feel really powerful. What struck me is how he emphasized revival as part of this prayer. Like, he wasn't just asking for policy changes or social awareness. He was asking God to work in the hearts of people across the nation, to awaken understanding, compassion, and a deep sense of the sacredness of life. He reminded us that sometimes it takes God moving in ways we can't control, transforming minds, hearts, and societies from the inside out. And, well, that's kind of awe-inspiring, right? It's a reminder that prayer is active and participatory, but it's also trusting God to do what only He can do. He also made it really practical and relatable. He asked us to pray for individuals, children in the womb, families facing difficult circumstances, and communities that are impacted by these choices. And he encouraged us to lift up prayers for societal awareness, for hearts to be opened, and for a cultural shift that values life in a holistic way. It's not about finger pointing or shame. It's about recognition, care, and seeking divine guidance to protect life at every stage. Another thing he highlighted, which really hit home, is that this prayer is also about protection and empowerment for the church and those speaking out for life. He invited us to pray for safety, for boldness, and for the ability to influence hearts and minds with love and truth. And that makes it feel really immediate, because we're not just talking in theory. These are people on the front lines, navigating sensitive and challenging situations, and they need our prayers. Throughout this portion, Pastor Gary kept it conversational, reflective, and empathetic. There were natural pauses, moments to breathe and reflect, and small reactions that made it feel like a real human speaking to a community, not a scripted lecture. He emphasized sincerity, encouraging viewers to pray earnestly, personally, and with compassion for all involved. It's this blend of urgency and empathy that makes the prayer so compelling. By the end, the focus was really clear. We're lifting up life at all stages, asking God to intervene in our nation, to guide leaders, to awaken societal awareness, and to bring revival. And there's this sense that prayer isn't passive, it's active, heartfelt, and transformative. Even quietly, even alone, our prayers contribute to a larger movement of protection, understanding, and hope. And the invitation to viewers is simple but powerful. Join in, reflect deeply, and commit your heart to pray for life, knowing that each prayer matters and that together we can lift our nation toward compassion, wisdom, and revival. All right, so let's wrap up with the final portion where Pastor Gary led this really heartfelt closing prayer for our national leaders, specifically Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance. And honestly, it was so reflective and compassionate the way he approached it, because it's easy to get caught up in politics or personalities, right? But he really reminded us that this is about hearts, not just positions, and about the possibility of transformation through God. He started by acknowledging that, regardless of where anyone stands politically or spiritually, God can work in the lives of those in authority. And, that's kind of a hopeful reminder in itself. It's like, we can't control everything, but prayer is powerful, and God's influence can reach even the most unexpected places. Gary encouraged us to lift up these leaders in prayer for personal encounters with God. He didn't just say, pray for them to be good leaders, but instead, pray that they would know God personally, intimately, in a real life-changing way. And that was striking, right? Because it goes beyond surface level change or political decisions. It's about transformation from the inside out. He pointed out that if their hearts are genuinely changed, then their actions and policies will naturally align in ways that promote justice, wisdom, and righteousness. And that's a powerful perspective, because it reminds us that real change starts with the heart. Then he got into a little background on each leader, just to give context, but in a really gentle, non-judgmental way. He talked about Kamala Harris being raised primarily by her mother, who was Hindu, but also attended a Baptist church in the Bay Area. Tim Walz having a more liberal Lutheran background, J.D. Vance moving from atheism to Catholicism, and Donald Trump being exposed to the gospel through people in his life. And the point wasn't to critique, it was to highlight that each of them has a spiritual history, experiences that have shaped them, and opportunities for God to work in their lives. It really made the prayer feel personal, like we were interceding for real people, not just titles or positions. He invited us to pray for genuine encounters with God for all four, whether through people entering their lives, through dreams, visions, or direct revelation. And that's so fascinating, right? Because it emphasizes that God's ways aren't limited to our understanding. He can speak in ways that are profound and unexpected. And Gary really made it clear that we're asking for hearts to change first, and then for the ripple effect of that change to reach policies, decisions, and ultimately the nation. There's this sense of hope in that transformation at the top can influence the entire country. He also tied it to the idea of revival for the nation. And that's where it got really inspiring, honestly. He reminded us that often change begins at the top, with leaders who are seeking God, who are open to His guidance. And if they have a personal revival that can cascade down into communities, policies, and the broader culture, it's like planting seeds that can grow in ways we can't fully predict, but we can trust that God's hand is guiding them. And yeah, there's this sense of urgency too, but not panic, just earnest, compassionate intercession. Gary also emphasized that this is true for whoever wins or loses in elections. The goal isn't partisanship, it's the heart of the leader and the well-being of the nation. That really sets the tone for a prayer that is reflective, humble, and sincere. He asked us to envision these leaders having a moment of clarity, a personal encounter with God that shifts their perspective and priorities, allowing them to act in ways that bring wisdom, justice, and hope to the country. And throughout the prayer, the tone was so conversational. There were little pauses, subtle filler words, and reflections that made it feel like a real person speaking to a group of friends, not reading a script. You could feel the hope, the concern, and the belief that prayer can make a difference. Gary invited everyone to join in, to lift up these leaders, and to envision revival spreading from their hearts out into the nation. And it wasn't abstract, it was practical, compassionate, and deeply personal. By the end, the message was clear. Pray for transformation, guidance, and revival for leaders and the nation. It's about personal encounters with God, genuine heart change, and the ripple effect that can follow. And it's about hope, right? Hope that no matter the challenges, God can move in unexpected ways, influencing hearts, decisions, and ultimately the path of our country. The takeaway is this: we lift up our leaders with compassion, sincerity, and faith, believing that God can bring revival and guidance, and that our prayers, however quiet or loud, matter in this process. It's reflective, heartfelt, and full of hope, inviting everyone to participate and trust in God's work in ways we might not even see immediately. Wow, what a night of prayer. Thanks for joining in, whether you prayed quietly by yourself or in a small group. There's something powerful about coming together, even virtually, to lift up our hearts, our leaders, and our nation. Let's carry this hope, unity, and reflection forward into our daily lives, keeping the spirit of prayer alive. And hey, if you found this meaningful, consider liking or subscribing so you can be part of more moments like this. It really helps us keep the conversation and prayer going.